Okay, good evening and welcome back to our final installment. We're gonna go until 10 minutes after. So normally we stop at 8:30, we'll stop at 8:40 today. Okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarotam Pravaramuninam Patanjalim Pranjali Ranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakra Siddharinam Sahasra Shirasham Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Om. Okay. Can anyone tell me where we left off?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I was talking to myself then. We ended chapter 3, number 55. We need to start chapter 4, I guess.
So do we need to cover 55?
We did.
We did not cover it. Okay.
No, we did it. We did cover.
We did cover it. Sorry. So then we have finished chapter 3.
Yes, we are about to start chapter 4.
So a lot of people say that the chapter 3 really ended at 50, and that these next few are in addition to these last few. 51 was a warning. 52 was 52 was how to maintain samadhi, maintaining samadhi. And so 52 talks about what it means to be self-realized. What does it mean to be self-realized? Like, after having taken this course, you guys can take a multiple choice question and answer these things correctly, right? You can answer them, but that doesn't mean someone's self-realized. Just because someone has intellectual knowledge about something, it doesn't mean it's self-realized, right? There are 3 ways to know something. You can know something by reading about it or hearing about it. You can know something by inferring about it, or you can know by having a direct experience. Direct knowledge is the only way to have self-realization, to have a direct experience. It's direct knowledge. Once you attain it, you want to have it moment by moment. For example, you can ace a multiple choice question test and get all the answers correctly, but if it doesn't show up in your moment by moment experience, right? Like, you can answer it, but you can still be lost in your ego, right? Someone can be lost in egotism. Someone can still have this attachment and have this aversion. Someone can still have a sort of fear of death. But once you have created a moment by moment discrimination between the self and the mind, or the chitta, then the knowledge of the self takes place, or realization of the self takes place. And then 53 is again similar, knowing the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. It's the same thing as knowing the difference between the self and the non-self. 54, one can carry this for the rest of their life. They can be triggered very little, or they'll be they'll go through life like a duck, where the water just beats off a duck's back. All the stressors of life just beat off of one's back. Does that make sense? It just bounces off. And then yeah, and again, he's sort of reiterating, talking more about how the purification of the mind from the gunas takes place, and that in itself becomes freedom or kaivalya or enlightenment. And that ends the chapter 3 of chapter 3 is again the vibhuti pada, which means extraordinary existence. A yogi who has reached the state of yoga and realize the promises of yoga, then lives and becomes extraordinary. That's why it's called extraordinary accomplishments. Any questions before we move on to chapter 4? Okay. Chapter 4, Kaivalya Pada. Kaivalya Pada. Kaivalya means freedom. Means freedom. Most books will translate this word as freedom. In yoga, we call it freedom. In Vedanta, they call it moksha, reaching the same state. Moksha means liberation. In Buddhism, they call it nirvana. Last night, I was hanging out with a friend who's a lawyer. He's a federal lawyer, which means he has got lots of clearance and qualifications to take on trials at the federal level. Very intelligent Indian man. His dad was a yoga teacher and taught him meditation and all that, all the stuff, Zen. And he was talking about nirvana last night, and he was saying things that was like not correct in a sense that he was speculating on what it meant. So very few people really have an idea on what it means to reach these higher states. What does it mean to be in a state of freedom? What does it mean to be, really, this kaivalya means alone. So can you tell me, let's think about this for a moment. What do the two words free and alone mean? Are they the same or are they different?
Different. Are different.
They're different?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Josh, what do you think? Freedom and alone. Freedom and alone. I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
For me, I think they're different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pete, what do you think? Teresa, what do you think? How so? Why is it different? How is alone and free different?
I mean, there are many contexts and examples of freedom and solitude, and in certain aspects, you could consider freedom and being alone the same. In certain aspects, you can think of them as different.
Okay.
So I mean, they're not like there's not one fixed fixed definition about either of those concepts. So
you think it can mean either?
Yeah, I think they can be both different in a certain sense, in a certain context.
Can you give examples?
Let's say somebody's trapped in an unhappy relationship, and to them, freedom means being alone.
Right.
Not in that really, like they feel trapped because they're coupled into this situation that they no longer want to be in.
Right.
I mean, that's something that just immediately comes to mind. That's right, just off the cuff or whatever. But
and then I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that. We'll come back to that example.
Okay.
And then go ahead and pause. Or who's got all the background noise there? Is that you, Pete? Okay.
That's me. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of people at this place.
All right. Now, Teresa, what do you think?
I mean, my thought goes like where Pete's does. I mean, you can be in a situation that you're alone, but you're not free, and I think vice versa. You might be free and not alone. You know what I mean? Like
Give me an example.
so. There's if in any relationship is where I'm going with it is you're free to do whatever, but you still have somebody with you. That's how I take it. Whether it's friendships, relationships, business, um, different different aspects of it. I see it as.
Okay. Thank you, Josh and Val. Give me an example of it being different.
So being free to me is like being free of worry and judgments. But being alone sometimes could be like where you are alone, isolated. Yeah.
Okay, so you're thinking of it on a physical level.
Yeah.
But okay. And Val?
I think no, thinking for that, I think it depends. You can be free of attachments, free of judgments, which is not physical, but more in a state of the mind and feelings. But not alone at the same time. But no, I'm thinking back about what Teresa was saying. You can be sorry, it left my mind. I have something else related to what Teresa was saying, because in a sense I agreed. In another sense, I did not agree, but I cannot remember the specifics. So I'll come back on that.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the yoga has nothing to do with, or this yoga has nothing to do with relationships. Because at the very beginning, I said this yoga is an adhyatma. What does it mean? What is adhyatma? Study of oneself. Atma means one soul, oneself, one's spirit, one's soul, or awareness, or consciousness. So if this is a study of oneself, then it really has nothing to do with others. And I don't think Patanjali was talking about your physical state, because only three postures or three sutras in this text mention anything about asanas. This whole text has been talking about your mind and your senses and your perception, correct? So this means you're free spiritually and mentally. And to be free spiritually or mentally means just what some of you just said. You're free from the bondage of your attachments, your expectations, your worries, your own mental suffering. You're free from the identification of the body, mind, and senses. And if you're still bound, like in shackles, to the prison of your experience, the tyranny of your mind, you are not free. Right? You are bound. So to be alone means you're untethered. Untethered. What does it mean to be untethered?
Not tied down.
Yeah, not tied down, not bound, untethered. But right now, each of us, we are tethered into our bodies, aren't we? We are bound by our mind, body, and senses. I go to sleep in this body, it's mostly going to be guaranteed that I'm going to wake up in this body. There's no escaping it. Whatever drama that you create in your life, it's not going to go away just because you go to sleep and wake up. We're bound by our karmas, yes? What if you can free yourself from all of that? Right? If you can free yourself from all of it, then you've untethered. You've released the shackles, the handcuffs, the chains of bondage. Make sense? So at the moment of death, the soul, awareness, leaves the body. In that moment, the soul is free. Yeah? What if you don't have to wait until death for that to happen? What if you can experience the liberation of death while you're still alive? You see what I'm saying? When my first teacher was really scared, I'm gonna backtrack. My first teacher was fearful of mentioning death in a class setting. She not only did she not talk about it, but she shied away from it. She avoided it because she didn't want to trigger anybody in the crowd. Because you don't know, like someone might have just had a death in the family, or someone might be facing some death in the family. So it makes sense, but I'm not scared to talk about death. And I think everyone should contemplate death while they're alive because it's guaranteed. And if you can get comfortable with death, you understand what death means, then you'll probably live to the fullest because you realize that your time is finite in this body on this planet, this time. You don't cower away and wait until the end is near before you do all the things you really want to do in this life or ought to do in this life. You start living it up and pursuing your purposes and your dreams now. That's freedom, isn't it? So when he says alone, he means alone in your awareness, in your identity. You don't identify with the body and mind and senses anymore. You realize that they're your tools to navigate this journey, right? You don't, like you're basically an untethered soul. There's a book called Untethered Soul. Have you heard of it?
Yes, by Michael Singer or something like that. Singer or Sanger.
Yeah, I have it somewhere. Looking for it. Anyways, He's a self-realized human yogi. He wrote a book called The Untethered Soul.
He has this thing in Florida called the Temple of the Universe.
Yep, that's him.
I have the book. I've only read some of it.
He's a yogi. He's gonna talk to you like someone who understands this stuff. He's living his life as a realized yogi. So that's what it means. It means you've reached a state of freedom so that you don't need anything to feel full. Because you realize your own fullness. Does that make sense? At all other times, we feel there's a void within us that needs to be filled, whether by a thing or by an accomplishment, right? An attainment. But when a yogi has reached the state of kaivalya, they are alone but not lonely. Because a normal person and a human that's still stuck in a paradigm of mind will feel like that. Alone but lonely. But a person who's reached a state of fulfillment, right? To feel complete, you don't need it anymore. So then everything becomes sort of, well, you become what's called a bodhisattva. You have a choice to remain on this plane for the rest of your time in this body, probably in practice, in sadhana, or you decide to come back and help others. You know, like a saint or a Buddha or a Mother Teresa or a Jesus or a Krishna, coming back to guide others, like in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna becomes the counsel of Arjuna, right? You guys remember the story of the Bhagavad Gita? So let us go through a few of these sutras in chapter 4, Kaivalya Pada. First sutra. Janma means birth. Ashodi means herbs. Mantra means words with potency, words for the mind. Tapaha is penance or discipline. Here, the word, we've seen this tapa or tapas, tapaha word before in the niyamas, correct? In Kriya Yoga, yes? Here, he's talking about sort of penance. Like, for example, there are yogis that will stand on one leg as penance, tree pose. They'll just stand in tree pose. There's also this practice where they raise an arm and they never let the arm down, 24/7. Have you seen this penance, this tapas practice, where a yogi will basically give up the use of one arm? Not mutilate, but they'll leave their arm up like this. After a few years, it's stuck. You get frozen shoulder. It does not want to move. Have you guys seen that before? Has anyone seen that? Okay. So a lot of us, we translate this tapas as discipline, I told you guys it's discipline of the senses in the second chapter. But here's one. Ancient or Indian ascetic holding his arm up for world peace since 1973. He has not lowered his arm since 1973. That arm is locked in place. Look at his nails. He's got no use of his hand. Is that crazy? If you guys have not seen this before. So some yogis, they do weird things. They'll do they'll stand on one foot. How do they walk around? I don't know. I don't think they get around. There's some yogis that will stand. They sleep leaning up against the wall. They will not sit down. It becomes a penance for them. They do it for a cause. There's some yogis that will not stand up. They will stay on all fours. They will live the rest of their lives on all fours. It's crazy. So that's what's meant by tapaha here, not necessarily a discipline of the senses. It's a different type. It's a discipline, penance type of practice. Krishnamacharya didn't agree with this. And then samadhi, ja, siddhayaha. As siddhis or supernatural powers can be attained by birth, right? Let's say you were born a natural born yogi, you were lucky, you had past karma, your parents were yogis, they passed on the karmas to you. You can get your powers by herbs. They mentioned herbs. I don't know what kind of herbs. I don't think it's pot. But maybe it is. I don't know. Mantras, practicing mantras, just reciting mantras over and over and over again, and doing tapas. These are 4 ways that one can create samadhi. So, or get samadhi. I'm sorry, not get samadhi. That the supernatural powers will arise if you have samadhi and you do these things. That's what it's saying. Samadhi is the minimum requirement. So there are 4, janma, ashodi, mantra, and tapaha will arise. Siddhas will arise, or siddhis will arise, supernatural powers will arise with a minimum requirement of samadhi and tapas or mantra or herbs or by birth. When I learned this with Ramaswamy, he skipped over a lot of this stuff. He didn't really care to talk about the superpowers. And I think one of his ideas is that it becomes too much of a distraction. So, but we'll keep going. Second one here, jati, species, antara, ending, parinama, transformation, prakriti, prakritiya, or tya, refers to prakriti. Apurat means to fill up completely. The transformation to a new birth is filled or provided. So he's just talking about how are we reborn? This sutra has nothing to do with the first sutra. You know how usually the sutras are done in order with relating to the last. These two have nothing in common. This is an extension of the karma theory. Some scholars say that the third chapter or fourth chapter was added later. You see some differences in the style of Sanskrit. All right, third sutra. This one says, what is the cause of rebirth? What is the cause of rebirth? The bundle of karmas directs the prakriti for the new life, like a farmer directs water for irrigation by breaking the bund. What's the bund?
The lock, like the dam.
The dam.
You call them locks.
Correct.
You know, like water locks are
Yes.
dams, smaller dams.
Yes. So the the farmer will dig trenches to direct water, and then once everything's dug, they lift the bund or the lock and allow water to travel. So in the same way, our bundle of karma directs the prakriti, or the universe, the material universe, energetic universe, the mental universe, towards the new life. He says the farmer doesn't do anything, just directs the water. The karma is what propels the next birth. Does it make sense? No one does anything. It's not like there's a deity doing this. There's not a god that is doing this necessarily. Because remember, in yoga, in Sankhya, this yoga comes from Sankhya philosophy, and in Sankhya philosophy, there's not a creator. You are the creator. You're the creator in yoga. Right? If it is to be, it's up to me. Although there are things that cannot be explained, so we have to take faith on that. But this yoga philosophy doesn't say that there's a creator that created everything, that is in charge of everything. There's no janitor that comes and cleans up your mess. Does that make sense? The essence of this sutra says that future birth is self-propelled. That's the essence of the sutra. Future birth is self-propelled.
Question, Ricky. Yeah, can I ask a question? So
Yes.
does it mean that the rebirth depends on the previous life? Is there any interdependence or not at all?
I don't know. Say that again, please. The last part.
Yeah. Does the rebirth or the nature of the rebirth depend on the past life? Is there any interdependence?
Not just the past life, all the past lives.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the bundle of karma that you carry with you is not from one life.
Right. Okay. See, it's an accumulation. Okay.
There's no beginning. There's no beginning and no end, right? So we'll get to that. There's a sutra that actually talks about that. We'll see if we get to that. Now the next sutra is this is so interesting. This next sutra is even on a different line of thinking. Each of these sutras have this one is similar to the previous, but this next one's even different. It's like they like got this fourth chapter and kind of put a bunch of stuff together to state some of the things they stated earlier in a different way. So, which is very unlike Patanjali's, thread of logic. Really interesting. Fourth sutra. I put a big star next to this one. So how does a yogi create different minds to work out past karmas? by mere asmita. You guys remember asmita? It's egotism. It's a feeling that I exist. Asmita is a spectrum, you guys. Like on the one end, you've got super inflated ego, right? On the other end, you've got a super deflated ego. Trying to bring it to like Western sort of ideas. But in the middle is the most subtle form. It's neither inflated or deflated, right in the middle, yeah? On the spectrum. So the moment you wake up, it's like you're experiencing the middle part of your asmita, this feeling that I exist. The ego begins to develop very rapidly from that moment, the moment you wake up from sleep. Does that make sense? And if it has a tendency to move towards the inflated side, it gets there pretty quickly, almost instantly. Right? The Buddha, in his moment of enlightenment, realized that the universe is flashing in and out of existence 1 trillion times a second. So your ego, in 1 second, flashes in and out of existence and moves towards its spot on the spectrum. Does that make sense? So someone who has a super highly inflated ego, it'll get there in 1 trillion flashes per second, and then you'll become yourself again. Unless you're tamasic, right? If you're tamasic, it takes you longer to get there, to become your normal self. Not your true self, but your normal self. It's a difference, right? Likewise, if it's a deflated ego, someone who's really critical of themselves and thinks lowly of themselves, it gets there within a few seconds if you're sattvic, or not sattvic, probably tamasic. But the more tamasic you are, the longer it takes to get there. It's like when you wake up hungover, it takes you a while to get back to your norm. But it starts from that center. When you're in a state of sleep, the ego's in the center of the spectrum, asmita, a very subtle feeling that I exist. So here, by the mere feeling of I exist, the yogi is able to create different minds and different chittas. This idea is the reason why a yogi would create different minds and different chittas, or different mental warehouses, or different mental theaters, is to work out past karmas. If you're able to, and I don't understand this, I don't see how I couldn't do it, I haven't even tried really, is if I can create several chittas, I can get rid of my past karmas much more quickly. It's kind of like Agent Smith in the Matrix duplicating himself and getting a lot of stuff done. Does that make sense? This isn't something new. We've seen humans with multiple personality disorders. Have you guys ever seen Sybil? It's an old movie with Sally Field. Sybil. Check it out. It's about this lady named Sybil. She had multiple personality disorder. People with multiple personality disorder have different identities. Sometimes they're, say, a man, older. They even speak differently. The voice comes out differently. They have a different set of memories, different impressions, different tendencies, different accents, sometimes even different languages. And then they have a female version. This might be a kid, right? I mean, and it's multiple. I think Sybil had something like 20 personalities, all distinct. All distinct. So this is not a phenomenon that doesn't happen. This is real life. But a yogi figures out how to do it consciously, to work out past karmas, not to like put on a show, because yogis don't show off. Right? They're doing spiritual work. So it's it's really interesting. It is said that when the nature of the self is known, the mind can rest and not accumulate new karmas. Didn't we talk about the 3 types of karma? In words, deeds, and thoughts, right? Words, deeds, and thoughts. Karma isn't just me doing something with my hands, my legs, my speech, my reproductive organs. It's also your thoughts. Didn't we talk about the monks, the Buddhist monks that went to Washington D.C. in the, was it the mid 90s or early 90s, and meditated on peace to reduce crime rate? You guys remember that? We talk about this? So they went, they meditated on peace, and they created change. They dropped the crime rate from something like 26 to 20 or something. I can't remember what it was. But it was a significant drop. Significant because the police chief said that you don't see this kind of drop in the crime rate unless we had a blizzard. This was in the middle of the summer that they saw this crime rate, because the blizzards keep the people off the streets. Ain't no crimes happening, right? But in the middle of the summer, they saw a crime rate drop a significant amount, because there were like 40 or 4,000 monks meditating on peace for 40 days in Washington, D.C., when they had the highest crime rate in the country. Anyways, yeah, thoughts create karma. But if a mind can rest and not accumulate karmas, you can create new minds to experience new karmas that work out the past karmas to avoid future births. Pretty far out. Pretty far out. Number 5. Here he says, even though the different minds act differently, they are controlled by one mind. So in the example of Sybil, or people with personality disorder, they typically, and I'm not a psychotherapist, but based on what I see and read, and sometimes the personalities will know of the others. For example, like Bob, this personality, Bob within me, might know about Jill, but Jill might not know about Bob. Does that make sense? If I had Bill and I'm sorry, Bob or whatever, and Jill within me, whenever Bob comes out and you talk about me and you mention Jill, I as Bob can know about Jill, for example. But let's say I turn into Jill and you ask me about Bob, I'd be like, who's Bob? What are you talking about? There's no Bob. Does that make sense? The difference is, in the yogi's case, what he's saying here is that if I'm the yogi and I create different minds, I still control all those other minds. Does that make sense? There's still central command. In other words, there's still central command. 6. Again, talking about these minds. Will they create karmas? Will the activities of the created mind created by yogic powers do not produce karmas that will accumulate? The activities of the created minds that are created by siddhas or siddhis do not produce karmas that will accumulate. They only exhaust old karmas. Because remember, the yogi's one-pointed here. The yogi has a goal. What's the yogi doing? The yogi's trying to get rid of old karmas. The yogi's trying to, fast track his way to never coming back. Number 7. The yogi's actions are neither white nor black. What does white nor black mean? Dharmic or adharmic? The activities of others, non-yogis, are of 3 types: pure, impure, and mixed. So they call them black, white, and gray, which is pure karma, impure karma, and mixed karma. So a yogi neither creates good nor bad karma. Everyone else, not so much. You know, one of the things that David Williams said that kind of stuck with me. He was like, let's say you're playing a sport that involves a ball or something, or you're working out with weights, is that you're putting prana or energy into an object. Right? You kick a ball, energy of my foot hitting the ball puts energy into the ball and the ball flies away. Or if I'm lifting something heavy, I'm putting energy into the weight. That makes sense? Whereas he goes, when you're practicing asanas, all that prana that you're exerting goes right back into your body. It's an interesting concept. You're not putting energy into a ball and sending it off. Does that make sense? So when a yogi practices asanas, that the asanas should only affect him or her. So you're not creating direct karma on other objects, which is an interesting thought as well. Number 8. This sutra answers a question that is raised against the Yoga Sutras, you know, like on a debate. I think, Josh, did you ask me a question about vasanas at some point? Was that you?
I might have.
Samskaras and vasanas? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think I asked how, if I remember correctly, how you could get in, like in Ashtanga, you know, they say it's an open eye meditation, but how can you withdraw from the senses if your eyes are open?
Right. Yeah, that's not vasanas or samskaras. Let me address your question real quick though. I think a lot of the philosophy that is given to students in the asana setting is not pure, in that it's used to explain an idea that's in alignment with yoga, the yoga philosophy, but it's not true. For example, there's no moving meditation in this book. He doesn't talk about moving meditation. Meditation here requires you to be in an asana, to be still, seated. But we often talk about getting into a moving meditation because it's the same repetitive things that we do over and over in the Ashtanga system. So I don't think it's incorrect. It's just a little, I don't know how do you say it. It's a little, we're stretching it a little bit, pun intended, right? We're stretching the truth of it, because it's true. You do enter a state. It's concentrated state. It's not actually meditation, but if you're not thinking about anything else, it's kind of like meditation. But you're not thinking about one thing. You're thinking about a bunch of things: my right arm, my left arm, my right leg, my left leg, my torso, my front body, my left body. You know, my eyes, my breath. So I'm thinking about a lot of different things. So it's not necessarily yogic meditation, but it's meditative, isn't it? It's meditative. So, yeah, I would agree with it, but it's not completely correct. And then your question was, how do you what was your question? How do you escape the senses if your eyes are open? How do you? You can't, unless you really have the ability to like really go into a trance. Like there are pictures of Paramahansa Yogananda going into samadhi, and his eyes would glaze over. He did it with his eyes open. and that's a very deep skill to have. To enter a meditative trance with your eyes open. I don't think we can do that. I don't think most people who show up to asana practice can do that. Make sense? Yeah. So here, vasanas, I've heard different teachers explain vasanas as a type of samskara. And so we wanted to get clarification with Ramaswamy about this. Let's see what this one says. He goes, there are 3 types of karma, white, black, and mixed. One karma gives rise to new life with the specific vasanas or subtle impressions that also manifest. Let's compare this 8th sutra with Swami's book. Okay, in here he says, of these actions, only the vasanas, subconscious impressions for which there are favorable conditions for producing their fruits, will manifest in a particular birth. Okay, so it's similar. I've heard teachers say that samskaras are like you have a habit of brushing your teeth with one hand, right? How many guys switch hands every day when you brush your teeth? You have a habit. Whatever hand you use this hand to brush your teeth. Some people say that's a samskara, right? And some people will say that samskaras that are deeper, that are like, maybe you have a tendency to react or be triggered by a particular word. Does that make sense? Like a certain word that's, if used, can trigger a response. That's also a samskara, maybe a deeper samskara. But I don't think that's what he means here. Are y'all with me? For example, okay, so for example, I had a teacher friend who said that in her trauma-based teachings, she didn't realize that even dandasana, dandasana, the staff pose, seated staff pose. You guys know what that pose is? Dandasana? Okay. Dandasana created trauma. Just the idea of doing the pose created trauma in this girl because she was locked in a closet when she was younger. And so she was in that position for a long time, sitting up against the wall with her legs stretched out in a closet. Is that crazy? It's a samskara, right? But it's a really deeply rooted samskara. So some people will say that's a vasana. But here in this sutra, he says that the vasanas are so deep, they transcend this birth. They transcend this birth, that they will, for example, the dogs have a particular samskara that we see. They'll eat shit, or they'll throw up and they'll lick up their throat. They'll lick it back up. And then they'll take it back in. Have you seen this happen? Most of us understand this to be normal with dogs. But as humans, we shouldn't do that. We know better, right? But you see some humans act in this way where they'll purge, maybe not necessarily throw up, but they'll purge toxicity from their life and only to bring it right back. Does it make sense? Not necessarily, but they have this, and you're like, wow, that's what a dog does. Like, do they not see that they're doing this? We can observe it from the outside. But they would say that's a vasana. So if that human was to take on a dog form again, he or she would probably end up doing the same thing. Vomit and lick it back up. It is said, I mean, if you think about this, if you think about it, if all of this is true, then this is not our first time as humans. Right? If this is true and there's no beginning and there's no end, and our lives are a mere flash in the spectrum of time, and how long have humans been here on this planet that science says something like a few billion years or a few million years? Which one is it? No, this Earth is a few billion years old. Something like that.
I think it's like 200,000 years. Humans,
I think, 200,000 years.
So I think I just heard that. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but let's just say that that's true. 200,000 years, then humans, I mean, an average human lives, let's say 70 years, which we know at some point in time, the average lifespan of a human was 30 years. But our genetic makeup allows us to live about 140 years. Some say beyond. Let's just say the average person lives about 70 years. How many lives could there have been over the course of, say, 250,000 years? If that's the case, I think that many of us have been human many times. And if that's the truth, and there are animals that lived outside of this realm in which humans have existed on this planet, what's to say that we haven't been other species that have been around longer? So if that's the case too, then most of us have all been most animals. We've been a fish, we've been a bird, we've been a dog, we've been an insect. Do you remember that time when you were a cockroach? You know? Do you remember the time when you were a fly? How long do flies and cockroaches live? These bugs. On the extreme side, some bugs live like 17 years, right? These cicadas, they live 17 years underground and they come out and they live for 2 weeks in the world, I think. They mate and die. But flies, what's the life cycle of a fly? Isn't it like a week or two? They get another janma or jati, a birth, another birth. In that birth, there are some skaras and vasanas. And then they enter another body, another birth that has a lifespan. Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 years. It could be 70 years. Right? You with me?
Yeah. A question on that kind of link. What does define or influence a rebirth in another body versus in animals form or natural form?
Say that again, please.
What does, or if it does, sorry, I was reading Teresa. I thought she was repeating what I said. What does define or influence a rebirth into another body versus into animals or nature?
Your samskaras or your karmas.
Okay, so that's already that.
It's
Okay.
self-propelled.
Okay.
Your next birth is self-propelled by your choices in this life and the lives before, according to the sutras.
Yeah, thanks.
He's just talking about karma theory. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, there has to be the first life, though, right?
For humans, yeah, there was probably a time when there was a first human, but the mind is older than that. Existence was older than that. There were animals that were conscious of their body, mind, and senses before humans were around.
I went to a kirtan a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about how at one point we wanted to separate from a higher being, or God or Krishna, and that we chose to take life into matter, Why would we do that? I know this is something completely off topic, but
No, it's not. It's
okay.
because of desire. Desire propels you. The only reason you're here is because you wanted to be here.
But if we're in union or in that state with the God or with the higher power, why would we want to leave that? Because
Because
isn't that what we're trying to do from this life, is to leave the physical body and then actually become a higher consciousness?
if you're a spiritual yogi, how many spiritual yogis do you know of all the people you know?
I could.
Not many, a lot, or a lot? Would you say the majority of the people you know are trying to do that? Or would you say
No,
the majority of the people you know are trying to be rich and famous and get gold medals and stuff?
I would think most people are like that.
Right.
Mhm.
So when you want to get rid of all your karmas, then you start doing stuff like this, what he's talking about here. But at all other times, we're endlessly chasing our ego's desires. And then when we die, we didn't do any of this work, or we might not have done enough work. And so we die with all these unfulfilled desires. Right? We have all this karmic debt that we wish we coulda, woulda, shoulda while we were still alive. Propels us into the next birth. Okay, so it's 8:10. We have about 30 minutes. Let us go through this quickly. I think there's a lot of good stuff in this last chapter, but I think at the same time it's great. It'd be great for conversation that we can save for another time. Number 6, the activities of the created mind. Okay, we just did that, didn't we? 6. Oh yeah, vasanas. Okay, 9. Jati, this kind of birth, human, monkey, etc. Desha, place, kala, time. Without to act without manifestation, memory, samskar, residual habits. One may be reborn into a particular species, even when separated by different births or different species, by different or unknown places, and by time because of the way the vasanas function, and because the memory and the samskaras or residual habits are consistent with that particular birth. Okay, so what he's saying here is different, okay, into a particular species. Okay, for example, a human. Let's say let's say that you're human in this life. Let's just say. And the next life you're not a human. And then the next life you're not a human. Your next life you're not a human. And the next life you're not a human. And then you become human again. You have another opportunity to become human. These things can happen at different places, different times, and it's all because of these vasanas or the samskaras. So we're propelled into existence because of desire. We're propelled into existence because of desire and karma. And depending on the karmas, we get different bodies, different types of bodies. Make sense? Here's the difference between samskaras and vasanas. Samskaras can be developed. You can develop a new pattern. Like I can go from brushing my teeth with my right hand to brushing my teeth with my left hand if I wanted to make that change. Whereas vasanas cannot be developed or changed. Species specific patterns or tendencies. For example, there's this I can't remember what kind of lizard. It's a particular lizard, or maybe it could have been an amphibian, but there are these eggs that are laid on this island. When they hatch, when they hatch, they have to dart to the ocean because they're vulnerable to prey, right? That makes sense? And their natural predator are these snakes. I saw this on some nature channel. So then the question arises, because they have to know to run to the water immediately. From the moment they get out of they hatch out of their shell, they have to make a beeline straight to the water. How do they know that? Who taught them? That's a vasana. It's species specific. Like babies don't come out of humans running to the water, right? Some four-legged animals are born standing. How do they know to stand? Like, have you seen, like, I think horses, calves, cows? Yeah, anybody familiar with them being born? Do they come out and stand up immediately?
Mm-hmm.
How do they know that? How do human babies know to cling when they're born? You guys had babies.
Mm-hmm.
Did they cling to you when they were born? Did they catch your finger and hold on immediately? How do they know?
Can these be instincts?
Right.
Yeah.
Instincts. So they explain it as vasanas.
Yeah, right.
We call it instinctual, but it had to have been learned somewhere.
So are you saying that it has been learned in past lives?
Correct.
Okay.
Because maybe those little lizards were born and were eaten, and because they didn't run, or maybe they didn't, they had to figure out, oh, crap, I want to be born again. Once I take this life again, I better make a beeline if I want to make it past the first 5 minutes of my life.
But then, why do all humans have the same instincts at birth, for example, because they don't have the same past life? So
Sorry?
how would you explain that all humans being have the same instincts at birth because they didn't have the same past life, so they didn't have the same experience?
How do you know they didn't have a past life?
No, they did have a past life, but not the same one.
The same one?
Yeah, so they all have a past
As
life.
a human?
Yes,
Huh?
yes. What I'm saying is, when you are born, there are some of instincts that are all the same across all human beings. However, they didn't have the same past. Does it make sense?
No.
Okay.
They didn't have the same past?
Mm.
No one has the same past.
Exactly, but how do you explain that in that situation?
Well, they had an experience as a human before, right? Because this is not our first time.
Okay, so are you saying that the human instincts are the same based on previous instincts?
We're not going to talk about instincts. We're talking about samskaras and vasanas.
Yeah, but it's linked to vasanas, right?
Right.
Okay.
So a vasana is an impression that follows species.
Yeah.
So if you became a fly, and then a bird, and then a dog, and then a human again, the vasanas that you got from being a human now will transfer to your next human birth. It'll
Right.
follow you, but it will lay dormant when you become a fly, fish, or a dog. They stay dormant. They're so subtle. They only appear they're species specific.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So they're patterns and tendencies, not instinct. You can call it instinct, but you're going to confuse yourself. These are patterns and tendencies. Samskara means pattern, tendencies, or impressions. Repetitive impressions create stronger samskaras. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, good question, but okay. For number 10, for all beings, there is no beginning to the succession of births, and they also desire to live forever. These two things, having no beginning and no end, exist universally for all beings. There's a desire in most living beings to live forever, right? There's this idea that I want to live forever. (11) When the kleshas from the second chapter, remember the 5 kleshas, carrying their results, a particular birth, a span of life and experiences, and the desires residing in the chitta have been destroyed. When the kleshas and the desires are destroyed, then the vasanas will no longer be able to manifest. This is talking about how to achieve eternal existence without birth. So how do you destroy this future birth? When all the kleshas and the desires have been destroyed, then the vasanas, which are species specific, right? Because vasanas are species specific, those will no longer be able to manifest. Therefore, no, you won't take another life in another birth, in another place, in another time, according to the yogis. 12. Experiences of the same object vary from time to time. Different births at different times. So again, this is also another thing that's dependent on karma. The example that they use is that our bodies are like clay, right? That our bodies are like clay. And a lump of clay can also be made into a pot, which has different qualities. If it's been, what do you call it? Kirin, the oven where you bake it. You bake the pot, the clay, and it becomes this hard ceramic type. Or a figurine, it's still clay, it just takes on a different form. He's just talking about future lives. They say that there are 84 lakh of species. 84 lakh? 84 different, a lakh is 100,000, by the way, L-A-K-H, lakh. It's mentioned in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. There are 100,000 species. 84 times 100,000 is 8.4 million. There are 8.4 million species that you can possibly turn into. Does that make sense? There are lots of possibilities. These experiences, number 13, these experiences which are manifest at the present time or unmanifest are a product of the gunas. Now he's bringing back Prakriti. 14, talk about the gunas again. By the change of the gunas, rajas, tamas, and sattva, which work in unison, remember they're like 3 children. We talked about this, the gunas being like 3 children. There's one dominant one, usually, but sometimes there's a weaker one becomes dominant for a day. Like if I'm usually clear-minded, there are days where I'm slow, right, or tamasic, but then I'll be clear again, more sattvic as a yogi. Or I might be, a greedy, Wall Street stockbroker. And most days I'm rajasic. I'm drinking coffee and doing cocaine all the time. But then some days I might be tamasic or sattvic, but then I'm back to being rajasic and greedy all the time. So, but they're always working together in different objects. 15. Each person's mind or chitta experiences an object differently. We talked about this in the first chapter. Now he's saying it, right? You might, one person might see a rope and another person might see a snake, right? And another person might not see it at all. 3 people walking across the field in the middle of the night, right? These are sort of answers to different concepts at the time. Buddhism was pretty prominent at the time as well. This is an argument against Buddhism. In Buddhism, they say that objects don't exist, that everything is illusion. Have you heard this before? Everything is Maya. Maya means illusion. Everything is an illusion. And here Patanjali is saying, well, if that's the truth, then how can we all experience the same illusion differently? It's just a debate. How would a Buddhist answer that, right? It's an argument. These are debates. Well, this is a phone. If this phone is an illusion, we all see the phone, but we see it differently, then it must exist. Can't tell me this doesn't exist. Okay. Anyways. I think both are right, but Buddhism only deals with what's inside your head. So what Buddhism is saying is that the object in your head isn't real. And yoga is saying that there's an object outside of our bodies that we're experiencing that is real. Real in the fact that it exists, but maybe not real in the fact that it doesn't change. Because this phone, 100 million years from now, will not look the same as we see now. A lot of these things will degrade over time and degenerate, dry up, right? And it'll change. So remember, what is real spiritually is something that doesn't change in the 3 phases of time. But Prakriti changes, the changing world. So moving through, if you read this, you can read this on your own. These are just arguments, premises and arguments. Like Sankhya and Yoga, we have these premises that see Prakriti is real, thoughts are real, world is real, self is real, creation is real, but the thoughts and the world are undesirable. They are dukkha. In Vedanta, objects and thoughts are Prakriti. Creation is illusion, similar to Buddhism. And substratum is real, which is Brahma consciousness, the unchanging nature of reality. Buddhism, there's no substratus, there's no world. The only thing that exists are thoughts. When thoughts are gone, nothing exists. I think all these different philosophies are saying the same thing in different ways, just different perspectives. Okay, 16, but you can go mad thinking about it. But some people like it. I enjoy it. Number 16, if an object is merely the creation of one mind, then it says a mind here, this is one mind, then another person's mind cannot know the same object. Can it be so? Said another way, the inner mind's chitta or thoughts, chitta vrittis, cannot be seen by another, but an outside object can. This argument also says that the yogis believe that the creation is real, but Buddhists and Vedanta versus the Buddhists and Vedantans, it's a little different. 17. Objects are known or unknown depending on the connection the mind makes with the object through the senses. It's kind of like I just got a new car, and it's a Lincoln. I've never had a Lincoln before. Hang on a sec. Teresa wrote, how did sanskar get translated to intention? I've heard it as intention for years. You're probably thinking of sankalpa, Teresa. Sankalpa. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
You're
Yeah, that was earlier. No worries.
It's kind of like I just got a Lincoln. Now I see Lincolns all over the road, right? Because now my mind recognizes it and sees it. Objects are known or unknown depending on the connection the mind makes with an object through the senses. Like we will see what we want to see. In other words, we will hear what we want to hear.
Can you go outside?
Sorry,
Sorry.
I'm meeting you. Okay. Objects are okay. But the Purusha, on the other hand, has no choice on what it sees. Right? The spirit, the awareness that's within you has no choice on what it sees. It only sees what the mind wants you to see. Because all that you see, all that I see is my mind. That makes sense? So if I want to change what I see, I have to change my mind. Okay. 18. This is sort of an important sutra. You can put a star next to it. The chitta vrittis are always known or experienced because of the non-changing changeability of the experiencing Purusha. Non-changeability. Just say unchanging. The unchanging nature of the experiencing Purusha. So there's this idea, again, this is reiterating, that Purusha does not change, Prakriti changes. Per Buddhism, there's no soul, no Purusha, no consciousness. There's just the mind. But here he's kind of arguing that and saying, hey, there's this principle within me that experiences the change. How do I know that there's change if there's something within me that doesn't change? Like, how can I understand change if there's no aspect that remains unchanged? There has to be perspective. So in the realm of physics, if two objects are moving, it's like theory of relativity type stuff. If two objects are moving through space at the same speed, can you tell that they're moving? Can you? If two bullets are passing through space at the same speed in the same direction, parallel lines, infinitely parallel through space, if there's no other object that was stationary, could you tell that those two things were moving? The answer is no. There has to be something that's not changing so you can tell that something is changing. Does that make sense? Theoretically? So that's the argument here. There's an unchanging nature within us that experiences all the change. So there must be an unchanging reality. These are all just arguments. "19. Another argument. If there's no principle that is experiencing the mind, then is the mind experiencing the mind? Not so, because the chitta cannot experience itself. Because the chitta is the seen and not the seer. Chitta can't see. Mind cannot see. "20. Again, another disagreement with the Buddhist concept. And because projecting the object and seeing it simultaneously is not possible. Like my mind cannot create an object and then see the object that it created. Right? I can't create a fantasy and then see the fantasy at the same time if there was no I. If it was just my mind creating a fantasy, there has to be an entity that sees the creation of the mind. Does that make sense? And that entity is me, which is soul consciousness awareness. Satchitananda, truth, consciousness, and bliss. 21. If the mind is to experience the chitta vritti by the succeeding chitta vrittis, this process is endless, and the underlying memory gets mixed. So this is again another argument. The question is, he's also talking about the previous. This is sort of in addition to the previous. If the mind is creating an experience and then seeing the experience that's being created, it would be an endless loop. It would just keep on, it would go on forever. Memories would get mixed up. There would be some sort of a malfunction in your own existence. 22, the Purusha is unconnected to the action of the Chitta. When different forms are produced in the Chitta, the Purusha sees them completely. Purusha isn't influenced by Chitta, even when the Chitta is mixed up. Like oil and water. Okay, I think I've got 5 minutes. So I think that's a good stopping point, you guys. Actually, let's go to 34. 34 is the last one. Purusha Artha are our human goals. Remember there are 4, did I talk about the 4 goals? Why is Pete on here twice? Okay, no worries. Okay. Is Teresa gone? Looks like Teresa's gone. Okay. Purusha Artha, what are the 4 goals? At the bottom, these are the 4 goals of life, 4 desires. They're underlined. So the first goal is that they're not written in the right order, in my opinion. Dharma is Dharma means purpose. One of the meanings is purpose. Everyone has a desire to have meaning in their lives, right? Why am I here? What's my purpose? The second one, we'll call it Artha. Artha means, we'll call it career or abundance. Everyone has a desire for abundance in this life. And then Kama, we'll say, is the third one. Kama means pleasure. Pleasure. Pleasure through the senses, through the physical body. Everyone has a desire for pleasure. And then finally, the last one is the desire for moksha. I mentioned this earlier. Moksha means liberation. It comes from Vedanta. In yoga, we call it kaivalya. In Buddhism, they call it nirvana. But there's a sort of spiritual freedom, liberation from one's own bondage. Does that make sense? These are the 4 desires in life. And the reason why I listed them in that order is that if you seek these desires in the wrong order, your life will be unstable, is a word that comes to mind. For example, if I chase sensual gratification or pleasure at an early age without finding my purpose, without creating my abundance, then I'm going to go into credit card debt, and I'm going to be miserable at the end of the day because I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Make sense? So what typically happens in these particular teachings is that as you grow up, you explore your strengths, talents, and weaknesses. Know yourself. What do you like to do? What do you not like to do? What are you good at? And find meaning and purpose as early as you can. And then use that discovery to create abundance. Because if you do what you love, right, you never have to work a day the rest of your life. And once you've created enough abundance, then you can live a life of pleasure. But what's going to inevitably happen is you're going to find that with all the pleasure and all the travel and all the good times, eat, drink, and be merry, you're still going to find that you're unfulfilled. There must be something more to this life. And that's when we take on the search for freedom, liberation, and nirvana. Does that make sense? So this is typical. But for a special person, a natural born yogi, they might figure out how to reach the end goals of life early on. And if they do, they become like a Jesus or a Buddha, a Bodhisattva, and they end up helping others along the way. Those who find moksha before death. Otherwise, you're just accumulating spiritual knowledge so that the next time you have a go-round, you can add on to the knowledge. Yes? So here he says the absence of Purusha Artha, the absence of these goals leads to the rolling back of the gunas to a state of equilibrium. Remember, we talked about at the very beginning, according to the yogis in Sankhya, that all before creation, that all the gunas were in a state of equilibrium. And something happened, kind of like the Big Bang, and then the gunas began to dance and play, some being dominant and some being not dominant. There's a dance of the gunas happening through the universe, through our minds, through our bodies, through the interaction of souls on this planet and beyond, celestial beings and whatnot. But because we've realized these goals and we've rolled them back, we've gotten rid of all of them. We don't have the desire for pleasure. We don't have the desire for abundance. We don't have the desire to have purpose. We lost all our desires. We became desireless. We reach a state of liberation. We don't even have that anymore because we've reached a state of liberation. We found absolute peace of mind, which is called samadhi, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. We found absolute peace of mind. There are absolutely no more desires. Then we can start rolling back the gunas to a state of equilibrium, and that is called freedom. That is called kaivalya. Because your attachments and your aversions are a result of the gunas at play. Attachment is rajoguna. Aversion is tamoguna. Make sense? And so whenever we can roll back the gunas into a state of equilibrium, we understand what it feels like to exist in that state before creation, which is a state of source. You get to feel what it feels like to be source again. And that source is within you. Same thing Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is within you. So the Purusha remains alone in its state, no longer attached to any prakriti, the untethered soul. alone, but not lonely. So there you have it, you guys. Patanjala Yoga Sutra. Did my best. All errors were mine, not that of my teachers. And thank you all for listening and your attention. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. Actually, let me give a chant and then we'll stop the recording. Then we'll have a little conversation before we close up. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhi Tamastima Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yobhakarotam Pravaramuninam Patanjalim Pranjali Ranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakra Siddharinam Sahasra Shirasham Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Om. Thank you.